Welcome to the 2019 Guide to Technical Synoptic Assessment. My name is Alison Atkinson and I'm a Principal Moderator for City Guilds Technicals. This presentation is the first in a series of bite-sized webinars which aims to guide and support centres in delivery, evidence collection and marking of the Technical Qualification Synoptic Assessment. This full set covers the following, and each will illustrate common pitfalls and make recommendations for best practice in centres. In Part 1, we go into the process of delivery of the synoptic assessment. Part 2 discusses the differences in learner-produced and centre-produced evidence. In Part 3, we give guidance on marking and standardisation. And finally, in Part 4, we discuss the submission of evidence to City and Guilds via the moderation portal. These 4 webinars give general rather than subject-specific guidance. The purpose of them all is to support centre staff in the delivery of any of the City and Guilds technical synoptic assessments. The Synoptic Assignment Pack is issued to centres in September-October of each academic year. The tasks are set to assess a range of knowledge, understanding and skills across the qualification and are not unit-specific. A typical synoptic assignment could require the candidate to carry out duties of a typical job role in the sector. There must be sufficient time set aside for teaching the whole scope of content before assessment takes place. This is why an assessment window is set towards the end of the year of delivery. Candidates are provided with an assignment brief which sets the context for the tasks which follow. They then have to draw on their knowledge and skills and independently select the correct processes, skills, materials and approaches to take to provide the evidence specified by the brief. Usually the tasks require the learner to produce written work and carry out some practical activities. During the practical tasks, centre staff are expected to capture detailed, descriptive accounts of the learner's performance. This information, alongside the learner's written work and sometimes photographic evidence, is used to assess the learner's performance, and the marking grid is used to determine marks on a scale of 0 to 60. The learners are assessed against 5 assessment objectives, or AOs. Each AO is weighted, which shows the importance of each skill in that subject area. For each AO, there are a certain number of marks that learners can achieve, divided into 3 bands. We'll go through an example of this later in the series. The marking grid gives details of each assessment objective. It shows the marks and provides both generic and contextualised descriptions of learners' performance across the 3 bands, giving examples of where the evidence might be seen. The synoptic assessment is marked by staff at the centre, so it's really important that all staff have been standardised to mark and apply the marking grid in the same way. We'll go through some ideas for standardisation in Part 3 of this series of webinars. Once all marks have been finalised, the samples of evidence and marks for all candidates taking the assessment are submitted to City and Guilds through the moderation portal. Moderation will then be carried out on the sample of evidence seen on the portal. Before this is done, the moderation team must be trained and standardised by the principal moderator and begin sampling within 2 weeks of the upload deadline in May. The moderator looks at a sub-sample of evidence and, if centre marks are accurate, they're accepted. Where they're out of tolerance, the centre marks may need to be adjusted or remarked. After moderation, the moderator will provide feedback to the centre on each synoptic assessment. This feedback concentrates on 2 areas: centre administration and accuracy of centre marking. Centre staff should familiarise themselves with all the guidance in the Qualification Handbook, the Marking and Moderation Centre Guide and the Synoptic Assessment Pack. They should read each carefully and take into account any changes year on year. The following table exemplifies where key content is found. Centres should also review the feedback given on last year's moderation visit and the centre feedback form issued every year after results. These documents highlight to centres areas of good practice and areas for development so you can ensure lessons are learnt. Guidance on teaching, learning and assessment and what's contained in the content of the qualification can be found in two documents, the Guide to Teaching, Learning, Assessment and the Qualification Handbook. The Qualification Handbook is obviously subject specific and is used by teachers to plan their curriculum, create schemes of work and lesson plans. We can see here on bullet point 3 there is a specific guidance for centres on timings, resources and conditions of synoptic assessment in each assessment pack. Tutors need a clear understanding of what is expected in each assessment, and they should avoid the pitfall of thinking that guidance goes across qualifications or industry areas, as a lot of the time this guidance is different. Along with this, it's subject to change year on year, so make sure the assessment pack is read from start to finish each academic year. Examples of forms to be used for the assessment and electronic Word versions of the forms required to carry out and evidence the assessment can be found on the qualification pages on the website. Again, it must be stressed that these documents have been produced for that qualification only, and in many cases will be different for other qualifications. Processes around moderation, sample sizes to be submitted, and overarching timelines for moderation are found in the document called Marking and Moderation Guide for Centres, found on the City and Guilds website. This document makes it clear which candidates you should upload evidence for and what is expected in terms of sample sizes. If your qualification requires a centre visit, you'll need to know where to find information on this process. Again, this can be found in the Marking and Moderation Guide for Centres. This guidance also covers how to mark the synoptic assessment, how to standardise markers, and gives guidance on evidence collection. Further information on evidence collection is found in each assessment pack, and I can't stress highly enough that this document is read fully to ensure that your candidates are given every opportunity to access the marks they deserve. We can see here some common pitfalls in the delivery of assessment. Firstly, centre staff can be uncertain of their responsibilities in the assessment process or not clear on what constitutes best practice. At the extreme, this can impact the outcomes of the learners or the timeliness of the release of results. Staff must be aware that there are two distinct roles which they have during the synoptic assessment. The first one is observer of practical tasks. The second one is marker, the person who determines marks when all tasks have been submitted. These two roles can be carried out by the same person, but they may also be different people. Imagine if you had a colleague who observed the practical performance and then described this on the practical observation form, and you, as the marker, then had to use this along with the rest of the evidence to mark. Was the description good enough for you to place candidates in rank order and then mark? This shows how important the descriptions are on the practical observation form. We'll go into more depth on how to create meaningful practical evidence in part 2. Sometimes centres' selection of resources for use in the assessment may limit learners or make it more difficult for certain learners to complete the task or demonstrate their skills, knowledge or understanding. Think of these examples. If you selected an animal for an observation task that is nocturnal, but selected another more suitable animal for another candidate, how might these two assessments differ? Another example, by allocating a client with difficult hair to style or one with complex skin problems to a beauty therapist could make the assessment unfair. It must be noted that the assessment is set on a level playing field, with the caveat that those learners who are capable of going the extra mile are given the opportunity to show their additional skills. For example, if an animal is particularly difficult to handle, a more capable learner may be able to show a wider range of skills. This must be documented on the PO form to enable the moderator to take this into account when marking. On the other hand, if a learner who had lower level skills was given this animal, they may not be able to show their skills at all. So access to the right sort of animals, clients, machinery or equipment is the centre's responsibility, and it would make no sense for centres to allocate learners resources which were not suitable. Sometimes centres produce their own pro formas to help them evidence learners' practical performances. Whilst this should not be a problem, we find the tick list type of document does little to support the quality of the performance and only goes to show what they did rather than how well they did it. If you decide to use a different document to describe practical performance, please ensure that it shows strengths and weaknesses and gives a clear, differentiating view of the task. This way, you'll be able to rank order and then mark your candidates, and the moderator will be able to see where the marks come from. This next pitfall shows learners being unprepared for the synoptic set of tasks. They don't know what to expect or how to employ appropriate exam techniques. This can impact their performance on the day. Learners should be given the synoptic assignment according to the guidance in the pack. During delivery of the taught content, it's advised they are given information on how they might generate evidence in each of the assessment objectives. They should be trained in exam technique and know how to respond if they're asked specific things such as explain or describe. They should know that the set of synoptic tasks are a summative assessment of their learning across the delivery year and be given guidance on what they must produce and submit for marking and the conditions of the assessment. They should know that once submitted for marking, they cannot have their work marked and then given back to them for resubmission. Here's a tip. Follow the guidance in each synoptic pack. It is not generic. Each one has specific instructions for that year's assessment. Make sure your students are aware of the guidance which relates to them. Early in the year, centre staff should explore how they should gather evidence for the practical tasks in this year's synoptic assessment. What are the practicalities, issues, file naming conventions? Who will be involved and at what stages? Will they observe or mark full assignments? How many staff need to be involved? How will they gather evidence? And what forms will they use? How will they complete those forms? I'd like to thank you for your time. Now watch out for part 2 where we discuss learner and centre produced evidence for the synoptic assessment.